Great morning, world. Great morning, friends. Welcome to Make Sense Mondays, the live Monday edition of the Make Sense with Dr. JC Doornick podcast. And a very great morning to all of you. So, today we're going to be making sense of something that I find very, very interesting. And that would be this hidden desire that rests in all humans, whether they know it or not. And that is this desire to strive for relevance. Now, we've been talking a lot lately on the Make Sense podcast, as well as within our community, the Make Sense Academy, about this idea that, in Buddhism, they say the catalyst, that's connected to suffering is desire, right? The idea that if we are desiring something or wanting something, it sits in the future. And, that's the catalyst for suffering, and the idea is to be able to celebrate where you're at, and that's a big key point of today's Rise Up. So anyway, when you look at any form of desire, especially the hidden ones, isn't that an interesting thing to uncover? Just this idea of this strive for relevance. So as we get into this Make Sense Monday today, I'm just going to offer you the ability to take a moment and just identify what relevance means to you. What does it mean for you to be relevant? It's very, very fascinating. And it's based on this really, really big breakthrough that I had the other day. So welcome, everybody. I'm so excited to be here with you. And, I'm just really, really feeling a lot of gratitude and feeling blessed for the state that I always find myself in when I come to you at this time, usually about 8 a.m. Eastern. And the reason why I have gratitude for it is because I've just come out of my morning structure. So I just want to give a big shout out and high five to the morning structure. If you're somebody that finds yourself kind of twisted up and by now, by 8 o'clock in the morning, your time, or maybe you're just rising up out of bed in the West Coast right now, and you're kind of feeling like the day, your brain is booted up, and whatever it was that you were worried about yesterday, or what you're worried about in the future today or tomorrow, has already kind of taken control of you. There's a different way. There's a different way to start your day and really learn a structured system, a routine that you'll have to practice with consistency that will help you become the commander in chief, the architect, the dominant force and creator of your life. So if that's interesting to you, and you're somebody that's been following Make Sense Mondays, just always an open door, open opportunity to just send out the words. It could be an SOS signal, or it could just be I'm ready. Just work the words makes sense in the comments. And I do that a lot on my Instagram channel at Dr. JC Doornick. And we will send you an invitation risk-free to come check out the consistent conversation that we have every morning in the Make Sense Academy, which is live, where you get mentorship and support and inspiration and collaboration, among so many other things, all of our online courses and, business strategies, and also the mental health component. This is a brainchild of my wife, Mika, AKA the chicken. So just always just remember, wave that Make Sense flag, and we'll send you an invitation, as I said, risk-free. So great morning, Deborah. Great morning, Colleen. Great morning, Chris. Some of our Make Sense friends. So very, very excited about this conversation. And as a reminder, you're viewing this live. So if you're viewing this live, you know what I mean by that. But even if you're watching this on our YouTube channel, you'll notice that that's not edited. So that's the unedited version. If you're listening to this on our podcast, which will air later today, this episode, it'll be all polished up and cleaned up without all the ums and the potential mess ups like swears and things like that. So if you like the live version, you'll follow the YouTube channel. And if you want the shorter and highlight version of it, follow us at Make Sense with Dr. JC Doornick podcast. Great morning to you, Paula. Okay, so this begins this 30 minutes that we're going to be together well, actually 24 now, begins with something that happened the other day. What's interesting about happenings is even though I understand that happenings either happen to me or for me, I'm very, very much aware of the fact that the first thing that happens when you experience something in life is that it happens to you, right? There's this space, and we teach that in this four-step system called the interface response system, once again, in the Make Sense Academy, and that's coming out in my book. We teach you how to reclaim control. But if you think about it, your knee jerk first reaction to something that happens, whether it's good or bad, is that it's happening to you. The goal is to learn how to chill out and pause and give yourself the opportunity in the space between the pause and your reaction, some time, to come up with a more reasonable future desired state, reaction and response. So I look at this story that I'm about to share with you as something now that happened for me, but I want you to know that as I share the story, you'll feel in your own ways, because something like this has definitely happened to you, as something that happened to me. It always happens to us first. And that's a very, very big power move today for you to understand. It's like if you're on a personal growth journey, and you're looking to become unfuckwithable, right? And to become the dominant force of your life, the shot caller of your life, which indicates that you decide who affects you and who doesn't, what gets into your life and what doesn't, what you allow to distract you from other things and not. It's very important to recognize that the first thing that will happen when you experience a distractive desire or something that happens, an occurrence, you're always going to, you can't avoid the fact that your human nature will always reproduce that stress response system. So when that happens, if you have the ability, this is a little side note, we'll get to it later, you have the ability to say, oh, that just happened. And I know that that always happens, but I'm going to pause it. That's where the win is. So I'm going to read a little bit of this and then just kind of free flow a little bit. So I'm very intrigued with relevance this morning, and that's because I experienced what I guess I would call an unpleasant thing the other day that left a pit in my stomach. So do you know what it feels like when you have a pit in your stomach? That's part of the stress response system. If you didn't get a pit in your stomach, you wouldn't know how to defend yourself from danger, right? So there's the conscious acknowledgement of my unconscious, autopilot mind. So I had a discussion the other day with some individuals that I care deeply about, and I wouldn't be having a conversation with people if I didn't care deeply about them. But some I would say young entrepreneurs and things like this, and I do this all the time. So I'm always in conversations with creative people because I'm very fascinated with it. And what we were talking about was, as always, a discussion of a project that we're mutually interested in, and things like that. So in the midst of this discussion, however, and this is what I think you'll be able to relate to, in the midst of this discussion about future plans and strategies, I'm 52 years old and I've done a lot of interesting things, whether it's public speaking or, hosting retreats and, doing mission work and podcasting and writing books and all of that stuff. So, I don't need to broadcast that. It's interesting how if somebody's actually done something miraculous in life, you'll find that they don't broadcast it. But I know that stuff about myself. So what happened in this conversation, and this is the part that I think you'll relate to, is all of a sudden, the first thing that I noticed is that the energy in the conversation shifted. Um, how could I explain that? It shifted from one of a mutual um, conversation where it was like a ping pong game where there was an equal you know hit from both sides, but all of a sudden the an unpleasant feeling arose in my body. It was a familiar feeling, unfortunately, to all of us, that I knew all too well from earlier days, when I had gone through a period in my life where I had allowed my ego to run the show. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, what it did was is it made me kind of like all of a sudden find myself. Remember, I'm being conscious of this, find myself on the defense, right? It was an unpleasant, a pit in my feeling. I started to get a little bit defensive. So what's interesting about that is that's how I noticed that something was happening to me, right? And I started to feel my body. This is my gift to you today, is when you feel like I'm explaining right now, before you even know what's happening, because your stress response system is an automatic response system, right? It's not supposed to be something that you plan, right? That's how you jump out of the way of a speeding car or evade somebody throwing a rock at your head or something like that. But if you have the ability to observe how you're feeling and your stress response system, I mean, obviously jump out of the way of the car. What you'll notice is that it's normal, right? It's normal. So, this feeling. Have you ever felt that feeling? Like I refer to it like as an icky feeling. So it infiltrates your whole body and it places you in this naturally victim-like status and defense position where you can feel your programmed and inherent stress response system rearing up, right, as it's supposed to, and in defense, but also in preparation for a protective counterattack. Right. So that's what I felt. And I kind of know in general what causes me to feel that way. But at the same time, I didn't know yet because I was oblivious to it. Right. I wasn't looking, I don't go through my days looking for problems, but I know that my body has this way of through my virtual reality machine, right? My sense making machine has this inborn intelligent operating system that picks up on that stuff. So I was, in this position where I was left with the choice of allowing my ego to take over, like I said before, and defend myself with a counterattack and protect my position, right? That's what an ego would do is an ego would protect your position of being right and being valid. Or my second option was to practice what I preach, right? Because I started off telling you a little bit about what it is that I teach people. So I teach, right? Now I have to, practice what I preach and teach and run my what I call interface response system. So, I noticed what was going on and I started to run that system of recognizing it, pausing, thinking consciously, and this. So I'm proud to say that I chose option 2. And I took note of the thoughts and feelings, like I said before, in my head and body and acknowledged them just as that, thoughts and feelings. And I agreed to myself in that position that they were normal. They were normal. I mean, if you think about it, do you ever like put thought into, I know that if we meditate, we do, but do you think all day about like making yourself breathe or, your heart beating or your blood pumping and things like that, right? We don't take a lot of notice of those things because what they're doing on autopilot. That's the same way that your brain works and your thoughts. Remember, you have 40 to 70,000 thoughts a day. And it's only when you try to consciously think about those thoughts and you hand pick and tether to, 3 or 4 of them and call them your reality, that's where things get sticky, right? So I was very much aware also of the fact that my stress response system that was feeling these feelings was one that's been programmed by what I call our mother, father, teacher, preacher, society, and evolution, our MFTPSE, MFTP, mother, father, teacher, preacher, SE, society, what we consume all day. You guys are consuming right now. I hope it's healthy for you. And as well as evolution, what's been passed down from the cavemen, right? So what I noticed, I then kind of like with a conscious mind decided to look at it and say, what happened? Like what actually happened, and what does it have to do with me? And I realized that, and I wouldn't be able to do this if I wasn't conscious. I realized that I felt insulted. So how do you feel when you're insulted, right? When you're insulted, that's one of the number one alarm clocks that wakes up. Your amygdala first wakes up with an alarm clock before you even know it. But what your amygdala will do in a kind of a fun way is nudge your ego and say, hey, wake up. We're being insulted right now. And that's where my stress response system, was triggered. Does that make sense to you? My knee jerk response was kind of like coming up. So because I ran this system, and I took note of that. Now, I didn't know I had been insulted right away. I just was smart enough to know, and that's what I'm offering to you. I was just smart enough to know that I shouldn't always participate with thoughts and feelings and pits in my stomach, because I know that I'm programmed to do that and it might not be beneficial to me. Right. So before I even knew that I was insulted, I needed to stop and allow myself to say what actually happened. And that's when I realized that I had been insulted, and I was able to pick it apart. So, a fun way to do this is, if you today feel those icky feelings, and you want to run this system. I mean, obviously, if an object is hurling at your head or a car is speeding at you, I'm not going to tell you to run your interface response system. That's when these things are great. But if you're just in a conversation with somebody, or one of those things where you're saying you're having a bad day or it's a tough day or something like that, I'm going to encourage you to just not participate with those thoughts and feelings right away and observe them. So, what it is that I did is I gave my knee jerk feelings, thoughts, and all of those things, I gave it a break. I said, "Hey, I might come back to you. I appreciate what you're doing, but take a lunch break." And what it did was, is it separated me from perceiving this solely as a threatening stimulus, and it allowed me to step into a space where I allowed myself to become an observer, like a detective, almost check the facts. I like to look at the way a scientist moves through life. What's interesting about scientists is, scientists, unlike most humans, don't care about who's right or wrong. They just seek the most current and relevant and results driven, scientifically proven facts. If you look at a scientist that's posing a theory and another scientist that's posing an objective theory, they will both openly and curiously listen to one another to find the better theory. That's what's cool. So I look at the life as a scientist. So as always, choosing options, one or two, are a very, very crucial part of this system. There's a great Buddhist story called the story of the two arrows of suffering. And what it tells you is that the first arrow, that is shot at you, is what happens. And as we know by the bumper sticker, shit happens. We can't really affect what happens, right? We can only affect our response. So the first arrow of suffering represents the thing that happened, and you can't avoid that. That's the arrow that's coming no matter what. But the second arrow is the one that you pull back yourself and shoot your foot, right? Because that's your response. So that reminds me of that. So as I write this piece right now, if I'm being 100% transparent, I haven't completely allowed my stress response system, because of this event, to, just completely neutralize. Like, I still every now and then have get that pit, because my ego is something like, even though I give it a lunch break, it eats fast and it comes back, right? My ego has been around for 52, almost 53 years. So I just want you to understand, there's no perfect science to this, but the perfect science would be in you becoming aware of the things that you're unaware of, typically your subconscious, becoming conscious of your subconscious. So as I write this piece, I still have not responded. I have not rebutted and responded to that icky feeling. And I'm proud of that, um, because I control the outcome of that scenario and how it unfolds. So I want to offer that to you too. If something happens to you and you allow yourself to run a system like I'm sharing right now, you're reclaiming control. Do you know what it feels like when you're out of control? Well, that's the pit in your stomach, and that's when you're a victim, and that's when things are happening to you. When you reclaim control, it's not about getting rid of the negative stimulus, it's claiming control of your perception of it and allowing yourself to have a say in what comes next. So that's the great feeling. I'm the shot caller, I'm the dominant force of my life. And I have found that the secret to my happiness, as a matter of fact, and fulfillment lies with my ability to allow myself to just simply have time to think about these things. Okay. So the insight that I grabbed from that, though, ironically turned into my finding of this thing that we call relevance. So I want to share a little bit about that because that's what this Rise Up is about. It's about this hidden, you know, desire that we have, and we know that desires are very much connected toward to our suffering, right? If you didn't have any desires and you were just happy with who you were today and you weren't worried about yesterday, which is no longer relevant, right? And you're not worried about tomorrow, which is not relevant because you don't really know about it, and you were just able to sit in this present moment, you wouldn't suffer. There's no suffering in the present moment right now, right? And it's the thing about the present moment that's challenging for those of you that practice this is it's so fleeting. You know, if you look at an hourglass, it's very interesting to look at how fast the sand, if you just focus in the middle, let's call the middle of the hourglass the present moment. um, if you look at the middle of the hourglass, you see how fast the grains of sand are going. That's the present moment. So it's hard to sit in the present moment because it goes by so fast. The present moment right now just changed into this present moment, right? So it's not easy, but if you were allowed to, or if you were able to do that, you would not suffer. So the insight that I grabbed from the experience sits in a space of a human characteristic and behavior that sneakingly sits inside um, all humans, and it's sitting there on a hairpin trigger, waiting to partner with your ego. So this is about you becoming aware of something, waiting to partner with your ego and pounce at the first sign of trouble. And that is our programmed desire, our programmed desire. This comes from the E in MFTPSE: mother, father, teacher, preacher, society, and evolution, what's been paid forward to us. So our programmed desire to strive for relevance. So I think you understand what relevance is. You know, I have the definition of it right here. It's defined as the appropriate or appropriate to the current time. So relevance is defined as appropriate to the current time, period, or circumstances of contemporary interest. So if you're seeking relevance right now in your life, just take note of the fact that you're not trying to be relevant as yourself. You're trying to be relevant in society, in the human race, and in the times and things like that. This is probably why in discussions people get pissed at me when I say I don't watch the news. It's like there's this weird thing where humans just have programmed into them this desire to be right about stuff that has nothing to do with them, right? So relevance sits outside of us. So our programmed desire to strive and be relevant. So I say programmed because striving for relevance is more associated with the inheritance that we've acquired through evolution to accommodate and equip us to succeed at what's called natural selection. So take note of that right there. Natural selection, by definition, is this idea of only the strong survive, right? So sometimes we're unaware of the fact that we're playing in this, we're striving for relevance, and this is where comparative reality comes from. We're striving to be relevant in society. And you might stop and say, well, I don't care about society. I'm my own person and things like that, right? But why do we unconsciously fall into this strive for relevance? I have observed that it has everything to do with this natural programmed inborn thing called natural selection, that we want to survive. Now, if you look at the evolution of man, you can see how, you know, the alpha human is the one that takes us, whether it's brains or brawn, or some sort of skill and talent. If you're the alpha of it, you lead the pack, right? So we have that inherent thing. And I think a lot of depression actually comes from this perception of a lack of relevance. You know, a lot of people are out there trying to find themselves. God, the personal growth and self-development industry would be at a complete loss if people didn't strive for relevance, right? I mean, what would happen if people never got lost or stuck? You know, this is what I want to do with the Make Sense Academy and with my mentorship and my systems is I want to hand people the keys to not need me, not need to continuously hear the same lesson and story. But if you don't understand these things, like I have this hidden desire to seek relevance in the world, you might not ever get it. You might keep on thinking that what you're supposed to do is succeed in comparison in relation to everybody else, rather than just succeed at being your unique self, right? So, um, our inherent desire to compete and survive in the hotel, right, or and competitive world, so I look at the world sometimes as just one big hotel that we're all living in, and the hotel has rules and we all abide by them. So natural selection means the evolutionary evidence that only the strong survive. So this goes beyond good looks, brain, and brawn, as I said before, which are the typical metrics we measure fitness, points that Donald Hoffman, Case Against Reality author, calls them fitness points. If you're trying to stack up in society, you're trying to rack up fitness points by kicking ass and letting everybody see it. But there's a hidden metric that we place too much value on, and it's important to know, and that's called relevance. All right. So most people don't know this, but they have this deep desire to be relevant. This is another fun thing to look at. Like, much of the dangers and pitfalls experienced, of comparative realities, has to do with this desire for relevance. Research shows that, here's an interesting one. Research shows that most humans peak at their creative and cognitive abilities in their 20s. Now, what that means, I'm reading this great book. I actually have it here, From Strength to Strength, with Arthur C. Brooks as the author. Fantastic book. Um, he's the one that I got this information from. But most people peak at their what's called fluid intelligence, their ability to create and come up with ideas, in their early mid 20s. So as we pass our 20s into our 30s, 40s, and 50s, we start to lose that. So what is important about that is, if you're anywhere past your mid 20s right now, there's a good chance that you're starting to worry about your relevance. And what I'm sharing with you right now is that it's totally normal that that peak of your brain activity and your creative juices, your fluid, intelligence, is starting to wax and wane, right? So just imagine why, as we age, we struggle more with relevance. So, I would assume that the young generation that are in their 20s that are suffering, um, are probably just so overwhelmed by society, then and are paralyzed and don't feel that they're exercising their natural born desire and ability to be uh, creative, right? So that's why it's so important to allow kids to just be creative, just to start imagining and stuff. And that's an interesting thing to take note of right now. I'm a father of three, and I can very much see how much my children are influenced from the outside in, way more than us. So this topic that I'm discussing right now is pretty friggin' relevant right now, because we're also seeing that we're losing the ability to be creative. But if you're past your 20s, the chances are is that your perception is that your relevance is being challenged, right? So for the sake of this conversation, rather than looking at our natural yet variable decline in cognition, and things like athletic ability, right? So that's some of the things that naturally happen. I mean, I run every day, but it ain't the same thing. I play in a lacrosse, team, and play in tournaments, but it ain't the same thing. I'm in the over 50s, group now. Can you see that, coupled with the decline in fast-paced world and in the rapid decline of relevance, right? So that's just an important thing to take note of. So, or at least a perception of the decline of relevance. So there it is. Boom. Am I actually declining in relevance, or am I just perceiving that I am because of the way the world has taught me relevance works, right? And can I flip a switch in my brain and start to reclaim control of my relevance? Well, yes, you can. But the only way that you're going to be able to do that is to change the way you look at relevance, so that the way you look at relevance changes. Wayne Dyer says, change the way you look at things, things you look at change. So if I start looking at relevance right now as just me being relevant in the world rather than to the world, That's a big shift. So I'll share an interesting insight like that in just 1 second. We're almost done. So I just said, can the decline of relevance exist in the person that does not perceive it? Okay. Now, you might be feeling the effects of the decline of relevance, and you hear this podcast episode and you go, holy shit, that's a big thing. I didn't think about that. Right. That's a power move to get to the first phase of what I call the interface response system, become aware of something, because that awareness of it gives you the ability and the power to say, I'm going to check, I'm going to look under the hood of that. I'm going to pause my programmed response because now I know about this unprompted, involuntary desire to be relevant, right? So that's powerful. But if you don't know anything about this, are you affected by it? Isn't that interesting? If you don't perceive something, do they exist? Perhaps that is where my future work should go, because I suffer just like anybody else. I'm just aware of it and I get to pick it apart. To voluntarily become ignorant to the forces and desires of relevance. Is that a strategy? I always say breaking news, I don't care. But it's like breaking news, I don't care about my relevance. It's not important to me. It doesn't in any way, shape, or form support who I truly desire to be relevant to a world. The only people that I want to be relevant to are my kids, my wife, the people that matter most to me in my life, right? And especially me and how I stack up in the world. So through the programming and past traumas that we have received and experienced connected to our roles as humans in society and friends and coworkers, as sons and daughters, husbands, parents, those are the things that I care about. But I also recognize that I have been putting a lot of my pressure on myself to stack up in the eyes of others. Right. So I like the idea of saying, I don't care how I stack up in the eyes of others, but I do care about stacking up in the eyes of people that I care about. Right. So maybe that's a strategy for you today. So you can see how we so easily judge ourselves and our relevance and how we stack up to what it is that society has labeled good or bad now. So you might be caught up in that. So just in closing, what does this mean for you? And what can you do with this today? Because I want to give you an action step. So if you become comfortable in your skin, and all that would be about is like, it doesn't matter right now what's going to happen tomorrow or yesterday. And it also doesn't matter about like how you stack up in the world, because you are your own world in one way. You're one of a kind. You're completely unique. There's nobody else like you. There's nobody else that thinks exactly like you, maybe a little bit like you, but you are one of a kind. So you don't need to fit into a world that's not like you, right? I understand you got to do what you got to do, but be comfortable in your skin, learning how to celebrate who you have become right now. If you don't learn how to celebrate who you are and what you've accomplished to this point, what's the use of setting another goal, achieving it, and not celebrating that? What'll happen is you'll discover that you already are, in fact, relevant. You already are relevant. So you can say that, say, I am relevant. I'm relevant to myself. And that's a great starting point. The only challenge you'll have is when you try to be relevant to others. So you see, you need not strive to become relevant to the world. Rather, realize that your relevance lies in the world. What do you do for the world? Right? You don't have to worry about how you stack up to the world, because that's about them looking at you. So to become the dominant force in your life is to become the force on the world. That's what it is when you start to recognize that you move the world around, the world doesn't move you around. That's what it means to become the shot caller and dominant force of your life, not a force of the world. The world does not dictate you during your lifespan. Okay. I don't know what happens after. You're the dog that wags the tail. So hopefully something that I just spoke about resonated with you. That would make me feel great. So remember, if you want to learn about our daily masterminds and our all of our courses and all of our content, which is extremely low cost less than you probably spent on dinner last night, per month for everything, called Make Sense Academy. Just always comment "makes sense" and I'll send you an invitation to check that out, risk free. But if something resonates with you today, what I love to say is that learning in the absence of action is nothing more than a distraction. So if you want to put this in play and make it stay, right, give it away. I always say, if you learn something today, give it away, share this with somebody in conversation, or push the share button, pass it on to your social media, but be specific and share it with someone that you think might value this, and they would have to be open, curious, and ready. If you learn something today, give it away, explain what you liked about it and the distinctions about it. Go talk about it on your social media, right? Give it away. That's how it's going to stay. So the person that benefited from this lesson today the most would be me, because I thought about it, I wrote it down, and I shared it with you on this podcast and in the live video format. So I own it the most right now. So I'm going to offer you the ability to pay it forward to yourself in that sense, and give it away and make it stay. Love and appreciate you. Hope to see you on the inside in our private community. This podcast episode will launch later today. Have a wonderful day.